Hello and welcome to this episode of Nothing Venture with me, Aarish Shah. Today in the studio with me, I have Angela McKane. Angela spent 15 years inside BP, building and leading the team that scouted and decoded the next waves of energy tech for the whole group. Now she's crossed the aisle, graduated VC Lab, and is launching Energy Mix Ventures to back the solutions that actually keep the lights on. Resilient, affordable, scalable energy. We're going to bin the lazy good versus bad energy takes, get practical on what the UK should build, and talk honestly about government, incumbents, and where startups fit. On today's episode, we talk about how you can be institutionalized when you leave corporate and how you need to move away from striving for consensus.
You are a little institutionalized when you exit big corporate. If you've been there for a while, you've got a certain way of thinking and being and working.
How is fossil bad, renewable good really childish or a valid viewpoint?
Yeah, I think the argument for hydrocarbons is pretty much the same as the argument for renewables. So this kind of feeds to your point of they're not really against each other, but it gets portrayed that way.
How the world is energy hungry and in an age of AI will become even hungrier.
In the years ahead, the world is going to be so energy hungry. We're going to need the sort of all of the above approach.
How clean and dirty energy is a simplistic framing of the problem, and why the energy climate nexus is important, but so is the energy and defense nexus.
The energy climate nexus is really important, but then there's also the energy and defense.
Why the UK's energy story is not yet written, and how energy abundance is the key for humanity to thrive.
I think of our thesis being about this quest for energy abundance.
Let's get straight into it. Hi guys, whilst I've got you for a second, I thought I'd just reintroduce myself. My name's Aarish. I am the host of Nothing Venture, the podcast where I talk to the people behind the stories that make the venture ecosystem go round. I'm also the founder of Emerge One, a consultancy that provides fractional CFO support to venture-backed tech startups from seed to Series B and beyond. If you enjoy listening to the podcast, we would really appreciate it if you can rate and subscribe wherever it is that you listen. And of course, if there's anything you'd like to discuss with me, do reach out on Twitter or X or LinkedIn. I'm always up for a quick chat. Right, let's get back into it. Angela, thank you so much for joining me here in the studio today. It's been a few months that we've been talking about you coming. In fact, I think we scheduled this. It's October now. I think we scheduled this way back in maybe February or possibly even last year. I can't actually recall. But thank you so much for making the time to come in.
Yeah, no, it's really a delight to be here, and it's everything I imagined and more. I mean, this is a really impressive setup, so even just being here is fantastic.
Well, I'm glad we could bring your first podcast in this studio, and hopefully it'll be the first of many more to come.
Yeah.
But let's dive straight in, right? So you've gone from kind of BP, British Petroleum, to micro VC. So I'm really curious about the stuff that you have to unlearn. I think about this a lot in terms of, the move from corporate into venture and startups, because it's such a different pace and a different set of rules, right? So you spent over a decade advising one of the biggest players in the energy sector on what's real and what's hype. Now you're writing the checks. So what are the kind of beliefs that you held in the boardroom or in the corporate sector that you no longer believe as an investor? And what are the biases from your kind of corporate life that still maybe sneak in? And how do you kind of temper that? And I guess the flip of that, what did BP get right about picking winners that a lot of VCs miss?
So these are very astute questions, and I have been working through some of this. I did the VC Lab Accelerator almost as soon as I exited BP, and it was really good timing for me because you are a little institutionalized when you exit big corporate. If you've been there for a while, you've got a certain way of thinking and being and working. That program, Silicon Valley, evening, hour time, fast-paced, weekly sprints, completely different mindset. It really helped me to switch up my thinking. So that was a good bridge for me. But to your point, it means I've been thinking about it a lot, actually, what's changed in me and in things I see differently. And one of the things I've noticed the most compared to that boardroom experience you mentioned and compared to now is my perspective on decision making actually is pretty radically changed. So if you think of the boardroom, which, in a room like this with a huge table and lots of people sitting around it, just by its nature, that tends to lend itself to a lot of people involved in every decision. Striving for consensus and, that can give everyone a lot of feeling of comfort, actually, right? Because you've got some really good brains in that room.
But it can equally lead to group thinking, lead to
All
paralysis,
and
all the
this
usual
is what
stuff,
I've been,
yeah?
especially in the investing world, and especially with the early stage startup investing. It's
Yeah.
a different type of endeavor, and so I've been really unlearning some of that, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable with some of the facts that you're not going to know everything, and no matter how many people you consult, ultimately, you've got the agency to make some calls here, right? So, I'm lucky to have a big network. There are people I can reach out to, but my perspective on contrarian thinking, it's okay not to have consensus. It's all right if people challenge you. And it's good if they do. It forces you to really think, well, do I really have courage in my convictions here? Why is it they see it differently? But then if you still do see it differently, then that's the secret sauce,
That's
right?
the magic, yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm like I mentioned, I've got a new toy, so I've been doing some longer form writing, which is something I always loved doing. But there's always been that disconnect with the laptop, if I can put it that way, right? So I'm kind of writing a bit more by hand. And over the weekend, I actually challenged myself to start thinking in similar ways, right? And I prompted myself with this question, right? Is venture an information arbitrage or is it a belief arbitrage? And what you just described is like the epitome of that. It's the belief arbitrage. It's like there is limited information. So actually, you've got to take what limited information you have, but then build conviction via belief in either the technology, the people, the market, the tech, etc., etc.
Yep.
I think I said tech twice, but anyway, you get what I mean.
For sure.
But I can well imagine having spent a little bit of time in corporate, but certainly in have seen large organizations how they operate. That can be really difficult because there is benefit in being a herd animal within a corporate. You don't want to go against a corporate line, right?
Absolutely. And you've got all kinds of just natural things that come into that. Like as a human being, there's people you've got to know better along the way. There's people that maybe, you maybe listen to more just naturally. And so there's all kinds of things, dynamics that come into play there. So much so that I think part of your question was also like, when do I feel things are sort of little biases creeping back in and I need to keep myself in check on that? And it is still around a similar kind of theme there, right? So it's almost like, catching myself doing that or kind of overthinking perhaps around what the competition is doing or, just getting distracted by things where actually that can come from a more risk averse kind of mindset. And there's a sort of flipping that to, okay, all those things could go wrong, but what could this look like if it all goes right?
Yeah. And are the things in place, or do I believe that there is substantial evidence that all of those things that could be wrong that are solvable, either because of the team or the tech or the product or the market or whatever it is?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And do I see this founder as someone who could handle those things coming up, pivot when the time's right?
Do you find yourself, and again, going back to this kind of the bias and some of the stuff that you talked about early, do you find yourself, when you're looking at a deal, for example, do you find yourself sometimes thinking, I'd like to pick XYZ's brain on this, or I wonder what, John would think about this, or Mary, or whoever? Like, does that ever, and do you have to catch yourself and say, actually, no, because yes, I could take 1,000,001 references or whatever, but ultimately I'm the one who's writing the check, therefore I've got to make the decision.
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes I will still, obviously, if there's someone who I feel is a go-to for me to be a sounding board, I might do a bit of that. I'm kind of lucky to have people in my network that I really trust for that. I've got two amazing venture partners in the team who are real great sounding boards with me as well, Ivona and Fengshu. So I feel like I've got some good grounding there. Actually, a lot of my LPs, like some of them are ex-BP and ex-other energy companies as well. So I feel the benefit of having people I can run stuff past to if I need to.
Yeah.
But I think to exactly your point, I do try to keep myself in check on that, because what you don't want to do is be over-reliant on that. You don't want to effectively over-index on that, and then you're doing yourself a disservice, right? Because
you can talk yourself out of anything.
You could. You can always find a reason or find someone who'll give you a reason.
Yeah, I mean, at early stage, there are always more reasons not to do a deal than there are to do one, right? Like it's about being able to break through that. And I guess the other point there was, BP is a multinational, multi-billion dollar enterprise. So they obviously know something about something, right? So what do you think they have gotten right, that potentially VCs have missed, or like, or does their kind of in-depth, and I truly do mean in-depth, both pun intended and unintended, knowledge about energy and the energy sector, etc. Does that allow them to see around corners that potentially a VC might not? Or again, does that blinkering happen like in the kind of famous Kodak, digital cameras go in the in the drawer because they're never going to go anywhere? Well, here we are today. Did you find that BP actually, that there was innovation that BP would consider or look at that others weren't even considering?
Yeah, I mean, I think BP's actually got it in its nature. It's got that sort of, it's always had a history of entrepreneurial type, embracing the future kind of.
Because at its heart, it's an exploration company,
Exactly. So that's sort of, getting out there and seeing what's out there, and it's a big part of the culture. But I do think as well, this is why your ventures team, especially if you're in a big corporate, the corporate ventures team is so valuable, because it's a perfect way of doing that. The beauty of a minority stake investment is you're not betting the house or taking too big a foray into something, but you are keeping a finger on the pulse though, right? And I think for someone like BP, to your question, their strength there is really the people, like I would say the ventures team really understand the value of relationships. And so, you see that from the people who leave, because I can think of a lot of the folks that I've been close to who've left the ventures team and they've gone off and in many cases done their own startup now, or are still involved in the industry in some way. And they keep their networks with them, right? Because the value of that just really pays off.
Yeah. I mean, I've had a long held belief that in life, in business, in venture, the strength of your networks and your relationships can often be like one of the biggest deciding factors. Like,
totally, yeah.
From my own perspective, coming back to the UK after 10 years in a very oil-rich country, actually, in Papua New Guinea, I didn't have relationships, but I had enough relationships to build new ones.
Yeah.
And that's essentially how I then ended up on the path that I'm now on. And especially within venture, right? It is as much who you know as it is what you know, right? Because you can know everything, but if you don't know the people that are going to fund it, or the people that are going to build it, or the people that are going to buy it, you're not going to get very far. So I think having those relationships absolutely works. And interesting, I think a lot of CVCs, corporate venture capital kind of outfits that I've spoken to, have a very similar view. It's creating optionality, right? Yeah. It's not necessarily about, is this going to replace what we're doing, but it's, okay, is this going to be interesting enough at some point that we should think about it further?
Yeah.
And to your point, again, it gives you the ability to both keep tabs on the technology, but also on the talent, right? Like, I guess that's the other major thing, because if you have a business that's been invested in for whatever reason doesn't work out, but it actually has like a fundamentally incredible team of geoscientists or PhDs in a specific area or whatever, and it becomes a potential talent pool for BP to potentially draw on, or other corporates as well.
Yeah.
I know, I think that's really interesting. And just one final question on that in that case, right? Like, so why did you leave?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, because it's not an easy thing to do, because you do feel a bit of a tug, and that's a good sign, right? Like, so
you didn't want to just throw your toys out and get out.
Get me out of here. No, definitely not. But I think it's almost a personal growth thing though, right? It's one of those, you have to challenge yourself at the right time to grow. And I was, the nature of my role, because it was focused on technology insights and where the technology innovations are coming from that will change the energy system, I was getting closer and closer to all the action that's happening out there. And then I think it's natural. I think what happens is you start to form your own opinions and become increasingly confident in your own. I've actually got my own view of the world now. And there's something enticing about, well, maybe actually I can use the network I've built up, use the knowledge I've built up, and really put it to use. You want to do that when you've got enough runway ahead of you to really do it when it's meaningful.
Yeah.
And to be honest, org restructures, opportunity to leave comes around every so often. There's people in my network who are making the move, and then that makes you also think about what's possible. I do think the age of LinkedIn helps a lot, right? Because it would be much harder. I can't imagine going through some sort of big Rolodex type thing. But, LinkedIn has made it feel like I've kept connections with people that go right back to the beginning of the career journey. And what I found was just reaching out to them, saying, look, I'm thinking of doing this. Even if you haven't spoken to people for like 10 years or more, people are really receptive to it. They like the fact that you remember them, you reminisce about the old times, and you're ready to start the new times. So all of that together, it felt the timing is right. This feels exciting.
Yeah, I mean, you just gave me PTSD because I remember every time we've moved country or house, I've had this like multiple boxes of business cards, which was the norm, especially in Southeast Asia, where I was spent a lot of time. And I don't think I've ever looked at any of those business cards, but LinkedIn, 100%. And I, I'm pretty good at remembering who I've met and where I've met them, why I've met them.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing there, it's interesting you said that, right? I think some people feel almost like golden handcuffs when they're in a corporate role, especially if they've been there 15, 20 years, whatever that number looks like. Because you kind of feel like, well, how am I going to earn whatever the number is, 100, 200, 300, whatever the correct level of compensation is. Like, how am I going to be able to do that? And I kind of flipped the question on its head. I have this conversation with a lot of people, especially my peers who've been in law or who've been in medicine, who are like really bored. Don't want to do this anymore. But how do I get away from like the salary? I'm like, well, flip it on the head. That salary, the salary that you've had up until now is what gives you the opportunity to potentially go and take a risk. But I think inherently you have to want to take the risk, right? Otherwise.
You do. I mean, there's a guy I used to work with, Adam Forbes. He's actually written a book on this, right? So it's called Corporate Escapology, and it's on that whole thing. Really good. Strongly recommend it. But those kind of things, like, it becomes the story you tell yourself in the same way as you could tell yourself all kinds of reasons why this investment won't, you can get yourself into that zone. It's the same with this, right? You can start telling yourself all the reasons why not to do it, and you start telling yourself stories that if you start to believe it about yourself, then you'll hold yourself back. And you might think it's the corporate or whoever else, holding you back, but actually it's coming from you. You got to take the first step, I think, is the way I always say, right? And it doesn't need to be the massive step, it just needs to be the first step. And I remember actually when I was leaving Australia, I kind of worked for a day. I mean, this tells you how self-aware I was. Literally less. I think I had 2 sessions with a kind of coach, because I was like, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do when I go back to the UK. And she's like, do this. Go on LinkedIn, apply for 3 jobs. Yeah. And
I did that, and I was like, oh, actually, I mean, I didn't get any of those 3 jobs. Let's be very clear. But I was like, oh, okay, it's not going to be as hard as I thought, right? Like there is a simple first step that you can always take. I want to shift gears for a second,
sure.
Right? I might be wrong on this, but I feel like the energy debate is pretty broken at the moment. And we're seeing lots of announcements. It's currently kind of party political conference season here in the UK, and, lots of stuff around net zero and, where energy should be and all the rest of it. Do we think it can be fixed, I guess, is the first question. This sort of fossil is bad, renewable is good kind of mantra is a little bit childish and probably unhelpful, because there's probably a complementary and a middle ground. So can you kind of steelman both sides? What is the strongest case for hydrocarbons and for renewables for the next 20 years? And can you give me like an uncomfortable truth, if I can put it that way, that you'd say to climate activists, and one that you'd say to, the drill baby drillers? And then how do we get back to, I guess, disagreeing agreeably so that we can actually make the trade-offs that are sensible in an adult way, because it doesn't feel like we're doing that at the moment.
Totally. I mean, so it's really interesting with this one, because you're right. It's all of a sudden this just seems to be in the lexicon of everyone, and everyone's thinking about it now. Actually, interestingly, I think the argument for hydrocarbons is pretty much the same as the argument for renewables. So this kind of feeds to your point of they're not really against each other, but it gets portrayed that way. Because the argument for both, at least if I think of our thesis being about this quest for energy abundance, in the immediate term, in the years ahead, the world is going to be so energy hungry. We're going to need, maybe for a while, the sort of all of the above approach. Now that won't be the case forever, but it will for a while. So what we don't want to be is too rash, I think, in demonizing one part of the energy mix when actually it's really needed, because we're doing all this really exciting stuff around AI and interplanetary space travel and all these big things that are very energy hungry. But yet we should want to advance humanity. So we really need this portfolio of solutions at our disposal. Now, I think if I was going to get more specific on that, I would also say, look, we're also that's the sort of big picture exciting stuff. There are very realistic day-to-day concerns for people around, in the UK, certainly energy prices. And then in the world in general, there's still billions of people grossly underserved with access to energy.
Yeah, right? I was going to say, you've got the entire global south and all the emerging economies.
We should be striving to fix that. So I'm almost like, we've got all these different ways of generating and distributing and storing energy, and more innovation to come around that. That's what we should lean into. So that's the sort of energy mix philosophy. Now, with hydrocarbons specifically, I would also say there is a strong argument to be made around, let's not forget that pretty much everything around us, like, we're really benefiting. We live like kings compared to what people lived like before, and it is largely because of hydrocarbons. I mean, every single system, and you just don't see it, but it's in the background. The food system, the fact that we have plentiful food here, at least, right? Medicine, I mentioned life-saving heart surgery and all the rest. That first got me interested in science and technology. I remember thinking, titanium heart valve, wow, somebody had to come up with that.
Wow.
And that's what got me really passionate about this stuff. But I've since taken it a further, a step forward from there. Like, someone has to be able to mine metals and minerals. Someone has to be able to come up with the, all the kit, the machines that you're plugged into, the chest drains, so much of that's coming from petrochemicals, right? The lights on in the hospital, those machines, you don't want to risk them going off.
Like, and you're gonna have a backup. You're gonna have a diesel generator. It's not gonna be a battery sitting in the.
Because your first overwhelming consideration is that it works, right? And that we maybe lost sight of that a bit because we are so used to it working. So what we don't want to do is break the system. I think that's the strongest argument.
By the way, I recommend go live in Africa, New Guinea. One of these, we had backup generators everywhere because we had brownouts, grayouts, blackouts, like daily, right? And therefore, when I was traveling, for example, my wife and kids would be at home. If the generator didn't kick in, I'd be like pretty concerned because they'd be unprotected, no light, etc. But that's but we were still the lucky ones. Yeah, like the majority of people wouldn't even have the backup generators, right? And I think you're right. Like, I think we've become very used to that in the West, right? That stuff works. In fact, I remember we were in Italy over the summer, and the power went out for about a minute, if that. Yeah. But we were all like shocked because it
can be quite scary if you haven't experienced it, because even 1 minute, a minute is long if you don't know why the power's gone out, and if all the power's gone out, if it's pitch black in front of you. That happened to me once in Texas, and then it came back on again. So it was within a minute. I was in a hotel, so it was all super protected, but because everything went dark, like all the streets outside, everything at once, like I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. Like, and I knew my phone was somewhere around me. I was podding around trying to find it just to get a torch, to get some, But and in that moment, it's more because you're thinking, what's caused this? How long is it going to go? Like, should I be trying to leave this room? I can't see all that kind of stuff. But it made me think, like, what if you're in a lift? Like, if you're in the elevator and all of a sudden it stops and all the lights go out, people start to panic. Like, even small numbers of minutes, and they might rack up to much longer.
If
than
you're
that.
claustrophobic, you know, lack of air, all this. But there's another thing that I just wanted, like something you said, which I wanted to kind of pull the thread on, right? So you talked about, when you were looking at all the things that go into, supporting where you have heart failure, et cetera, right? Like, and all the minerals that have to be drilled. Obviously, one of the arguments trotted out by people around, let's say, electric cars is that, well, actually, they may seemingly be, less quote unquote harmful, damaging to the planet, but you've got to mine all the lithium, you've got to mine all of the nickel, the cobalt, all the stuff that goes into building both the car, but especially the battery, all of which are rare earth minerals, as we know. What's your kind of argument? What would you say to those people? Like, I mean, because for me, it definitely feels like, electric vehicles are both smart as well as a sensible path forward for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
But that argument equally does kind of stop me in my tracks every now and again. So what's your argument against that?
I actually think it's a really strong argument. And so where I've landed on that is, it's like you said at the beginning, that some of the terminology has been kind of oversimplistic and unhelpful, right? And I actually wonder if we've kind of walked ourselves into that by this idea of like clean and dirty energy. And we talk about clean tech, but actually it's just that we're not seeing, like, the mining and so on. Now, I'm not saying that mining is inherently bad. We're again, just like with hydrocarbons, like we're making a lot of things that are incredibly useful and fantastic, but we should be looking to minimize, of course, negative social or environmental impacts, and they are significant, right? So, I think when it comes to electrification in general, so where we are right now with renewables and EVs and all the rest, yes, one of the strongest uncomfortable truths that you might bring to someone would be something around, I guess, let's take one example, copper, just the amount of copper that needs to be used. Where is that getting mined? Well, we mines in places like Chile. What are we finding is happening there right now? Well, we're finding that, in the vicinity of those mines, there's been high rates of cancer because of all kinds of pollution that does get into the water and the food system and all the rest of it, from what happens to be in the land and around those specific mines. Now, you're going to have lots of examples like this, tailing dams around different mines, and some of them collapse and get into rivers, and it goes on and on and on, right? So there's, I think the message to take from that is there isn't a simple kind of CO2 is the one thing to focus on. It's really bad, and that's why we should, rule out this part of the energy mix, and this other thing will just sort of, it's a bit uncomfortable, we'll just pretend it's not happening. That can't be the answer, right? So what we almost have to do is say, okay, as humans, we want to have all these things, but we want to do it in a responsible way. So how do we deal with that complexity, and how do we acknowledge where there are problems that are still yet to be solved? This is where I get excited about ventures as well, though, right? Because if we can be really candid with ourselves around these are where the issues currently are today, then you do actually start to see some really interesting startup activity that can solve it, which is a completely different way of thinking about it, right? So there are people working right now, for example, on new materials that would displace copper, be just as conductive. Again, they're early stage startups, and of course, it doesn't mean you can say, okay, so that means we don't have to worry, we don't have to do anything. No, you still need to be mitigating and doing everything correctly. But ultimately, it's a good way of saying, let's be really open about where there are some real challenges, because actually someone out there, some bright spark, some fantastic founder, some innovator is going to work the problem.
Well, I think I talked to you about this offline. Like, I spoke to a founder recently, and they are recycling battery material from gigawatt factories, right, which is currently just being dumped. So even if they can recover like 30% right, of the material, that's already a step ahead. Now, there's a patented process, it's very early, who knows, can it work at scale, et cetera, et cetera. But to your point, should not having, so I guess maybe the point is not having all of the solutions in place today does not mean you don't do things, but you've got to be cognizant about the second order effects that and the externalities that are happening as a result of them. And you've got to figure out how to mitigate, control, and also what are the healthy trade-offs that you are willing to make in the short, mid, and I guess long term, right? Because obviously, equally, it's not as if there aren't trade-offs in traditional kind of hydrocarbon technology, right? Like, I mean, you know, not to harp on about my time in New Guinea because it isn't all that interesting, but whilst I was there, Exxon came in and built a $20 billion liquefied natural gas project. Well, guess what? I mean, that was pretty disruptive, right, to the to the environment. I mean, like, you know, they did a hell of a lot of planning and mitigated as much as they can. But at the end of the day, you know, they were sending pipelines down, you know, from essentially the highlands down to the coast, and then processing plant, shipping plant, you know, getting it shipped off, etc. And you can't argue that, you know, that doesn't have an impact. It clearly does. Yeah. And I guess energy by its very nature, right, unless it is 100% renewable, or, you know, wind or solar, and even wind, right, and even solar will have an impact.
Well, especially right now they do, because if you think of something like wind, often people think about the wind blowing, right? But of course, there's all the concrete and all the steel and all the building of ports to get things offshore, and all the, you know. So all I'm saying on that is it's a heavily industrial activity as well. Yeah. You know, so each of these things has that attached to them. I think you've made the point really well there when you said they mitigate as best as they can, because I think that actually that's the critical point. It's like, who's doing it and how responsibly are they doing it? And we need to be thinking about that, because if we're in the North Sea, this is a big issue, right? There's big discussions around, you know, whether we should be able to explore for new oil and gas licenses or not, and all the rest. If the world still needs the product, we do need to be thinking about who's doing it and where it's coming from, because those are the kind of trade-offs that we need to be factoring in.
We're in the middle of, well, Europe is at the brink of a potential war, which a lot of which has been driven by energy, right? Like, essentially.
Well, that's the other thing. I mean, this is, you know, that's another really important point. You're so right, because this is why with the energy mix, we've tried to badge ourselves as an energy tech fund very specifically. And what we mean by that is,
as opposed to
a climate tech fund, for example. So the energy climate nexus is really important. A lot of what we've just talked about fits within it, or even energy and environment, actually, more, because all those components go beyond even the climate, right? So there's that, but then there's also the energy and defense. I'm almost seeing it as, we have this energy tech way of badging the fund, and then around it, it's like we have a number of little Venn diagrams, you know, and there's intersections with so many different areas of focus, and some of them may increase and decrease in significance in different moments in time. Right now, whether we like it or not, defense is a big one. Yep.
There's a whole question of sovereignty across multiple areas, of which energy is definitely one of them.
If you end up in a wartime footing, like, hostile actors will come after your energy supply. Like, we see that's what happens. Yeah. So we have to be thinking about that.
It's probably the easiest to disrupt and causes the most disruption.
Absolutely. Then suddenly people realize that thing they weren't thinking that much about. Power is everything. You know, all of it.
Like, we wouldn't be in this studio without energy. Like, the lights are pretty strong at the moment. So, like, it definitely, would definitely disrupt my life. I mean, sorry, I'm being very facetious, but it would. No, it would. Yeah, 100%. Well, no, I mean, like, from my perspective, if I think about it, okay, yes, obviously the ordinary conveniences, but my car is an electric car. I only have one car. If there's no energy, I can't drive. I can't get from A to B. The trains wouldn't work. The tube wouldn't work. You know, a lot of the buses in London are now electric vehicles as opposed to diesel or petrol. And that's, you know, that's just the convenience stuff.
That's then just you've the got convenience,
food, then you've got the fundamentals, food and
and then just human behavior, like, because we've seen that people can get spooked with that as well. Like, you know, think of the cars piling up at the petrol station, or there's a rumor that, like, I don't know, toilet rolls were selling out, and then everyone does a rush on toilet rolls, and then they really are selling out, or there's none left.
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
You know, and those are kind of small, laughable things almost, right? Because you can sort of muddle along for a while, but that can grow really quickly. You know?
And it wouldn't be hard to the point, to disrupt by a bad actor. So let's actually talk about, one of the big actors, right? So, or some of them who, because I struggle, especially with energy, right? Like who should be doing what and what should be stopping, right? Because, we've discussed and you've said to me that, government has to guarantee secure, affordable supply and then back off from picking kind of tech winners, right?
Yeah.
So imagine you're the UK energy minister. Not sure you'd want that job, but imagine you are for a couple of years, 24. Yeah, let's give it a little while. For let's say 2 years, 24 months, right?
Sure.
With emergency powers and a bunch of money behind you, $20 billion or something. What do you fast track? Is it generation? Is it grid? Is it storage? Is it permits? And what do you stop? And what are the market rules that I guess change on day one? And how should incumbents partner with startups without smothering them? And we've talked a little bit about this, in the discussion around BP. And where is venture not the right capital for this transition? Because this is the other thing, right? Like a lot of people I've talked to, especially in the hydrogen sector, they complain like venture doesn't work because these are infrastructure projects. So therefore, they need infrastructure funding. However, because they are early stage, they don't get the governmental funding because that tends to go to the less riskier incumbents, et cetera, et cetera. So put your, who is it, Ed Miliband? I don't know. Put whoever the hat is, put it on. What would you do? What would you stop? What changes?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say on that, so we were talking about how we need to be able to disagree and all the rest, right? So I'd first put a wee caveat here that everything I would do right now, I'd be doing on the basis of the knowledge I have right now.
Right now,
I would try to keep myself easy to say, and it's really hard to do, especially if you get into a position of power, but I would try to keep myself open to challenge and changing my mind and being persuadable, because none of us have all the answers here right now. The story is not yet written. It could change quite radically on some geopolitical thing or some breakthrough innovation that comes along, right? So we need to be really open to that. But right now, if it was tomorrow, the first thing I would do, I don't know if I'm being controversial here, but the first thing I would do is take away any uncertainty around the North Sea. So I'd be pretty definitive on that. In the immediate term, I'd be opening up more options there for a more business friendly environment for exploration, because it's still needed and it's better than importing with higher emissions from various places around the world.
And maybe we could even create a UK sovereign wealth fund potentially.
Well, this is the thing, right? Others have. Yeah.
Bizarrely.
Yeah. So, yes, genuinely. So there's all of that. That would be kind of number one, because at the moment, I think the worst thing you can have is when there's uncertainty and is it, isn't it, and all the rest. And so we'd fix that. And also look at things like the windfall tax and all the rest, maybe time to phase that out now. You really want to make a business-friendly, investable environment. The UK economy needs it. We need energy for everything. So I would start with that. But at the same time, looking across the energy mix and the energy evolution, as I call it, it's not, as you were just saying at the beginning, I don't think it's a direct transition overnight from fossils to renewables, right? It just doesn't play out that way. But it's an evolving energy mix, and the story is not yet written as to what that final mix will be. Maybe it will always evolve. And maybe what's right for you in the mix will vary depending on where you are in the world and what innovations come along. So that's okay, right? Right now in the UK, I would also be looking at making things a lot easier from a regulatory perspective for nuclear. We had a lot of expertise in nuclear. It's understandable why we got spooked on that, let's be honest. Some things happened that people were trying to make sense of. It was a different world. But
are you talking specifically about things like
Chernobyl and all the rest? Yeah. But we have overreacted now. That's, again, it came from a place of good intention, right? But ultimately, we've ended up calling the risk incorrectly, right? As we look across all these different energy sources, and we're making it much harder on ourselves to get things like nuclear plants done.
Especially when you look at somewhere like France, which is just rolling them out.
We could have had a grid like the French grid, right? Yeah. And if you want low carbon and you want to sort of solve that piece, well, like this, they're also far from perfect for all kinds of reasons. Of course, you never really get perfection, right? But it's a big part of the story. I think now especially as well, because we've got innovations on the horizon like small modular reactors, which as far as I can see are not actually particularly small. So smaller modular reactors, but also microreactors and so on. There's new ways of, new designs, if you like, that but have also already been through, various checks and imbalances and all the things that you would want, whether it be through France or Finland or whoever else, like South Korea even. We're not the only people doing this, and there are ways of sharing that knowledge better and not being over the top in terms of holding things back. So that would be another thing. And then I think linked to that is permitting in general. So, I heard that the Office for Nuclear Regulation is in the Department of Work and Pensions. I don't know if that's true, but if it is, it shouldn't be. So I'd put that in the Department of Energy, right? That makes sense. Quite enjoying being the Energy Minister at the moment.
We might need to fact check that, guys, but I mean, like,
yeah, we probably will.
It wouldn't surprise me if that were the case. Okay.
Yeah, and then, but permitting in general, right? So, there's things around grid connection queues that we could maybe be triaging better. There's things around, there's just lots of little small quick wins around permitting as well, though, right? Because you mentioned electric vehicles. Like one startup that I was working with, really cool, right? So if you think of the problem statement, people want to charge from home, and one of the things holding people back making the switch to EV is they maybe don't have a driveway, so they're thinking it can't charge from home very easily. For a little while, I was working with a startup called Charge Gully. The founder is a really good engineer, and he's made this beautifully engineered product that just goes in a little bit. You don't drill too far into the pavement, and it just goes across from the wall to the curb. There's a few options around. Like people are trying to solve this issue. How would you charge your car if you didn't have a driveway? Those types of things, you just need council approval and things for things to just happen.
Yeah, well, good luck with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's things that are in our gift, right? If we want to get serious about, trying things and making innovation more, that's what I would try to do as energy minister.
I mean, it's really interesting that point around the electric vehicle charging, right? So I live in a block of apartments. They set up but didn't install. So they set up the capacity, but not. But not the technology to actually, to have EV chargers, or rather the EV chargers weren't installed. So we had to install our own. But as it turns out, they'd limited the kilowattage, right? So we can only get max 7, which is fine. Like we can charge our whole car overnight, but fast charge would take 30 minutes, right? So it's a bit different, but you need 3-phase and all that sort of stuff. But it cost us a couple of grand to install.
Yeah.
Because not only did we have to run the cable from the garage into our apartment, and we had to bring Wi-Fi down, but we then had to get the kind of the fire stopping certification, which actually was the most expensive thing amongst the whole thing. So it cost us like a couple of grand to do this, so I thought like very long and hard, like, okay, do we just not bother and use, chargers around and about? And then ultimately we were like, well, if we're going to go down the route of having an EV, like ultimately we're going to want this. But it took a long time and a lot of faffing around and a lot of permitting and a lot of, the usual stuff. And we had to talk to the managing agent and all this sort of stuff to get it done.
Yeah.
When all we wanted to do was charge our cars. I've always said, like, the reason one of the reasons we have a Tesla, and I know a lot of people won't like me for saying that we have a Tesla, but we do. The charging network is second to none. I mean, like
totally, yeah. And on that point, because this is the other thing I'm enjoying being this energy minister. If I was energy minister, I'd also be saying, hey, like, what can we bring in for off-grid solutions as well for folks, right? So the Tesla solar with Powerwall would be one example of that. Because back to your point around, it's good to have backups actually, but it's good to have solutions for not relying overly on the grid either. And realistically, as demand for power is only going to go up, like with electric vehicle rollout and all the rest, all the electrification stuff, plus the AI and data centers and all the rest. And we should be grabbing that opportunity. Like, we're getting offers. Microsoft and all the rest want to come to the UK and do data centers and do all this, right? So to do that, there's a real opportunity for
Nvidia have just committed $2 billion via 5 funds. Now that's not for data centers, but you're going to need data centers.
You are, and so
off the back of that.
If I was the energy minister again, I'd be saying, right, okay, I want really good analysis on what our options are there. Like, for example, we're paying billions on curtailment costs on wind right now, right?
Yeah.
That power could be used presumably for something. Maybe it could be used in this space.
Yeah.
If the answer is no, it needs firm power. Well, you've got the gas there as well.
Yeah.
But it'd be good to know that definitively, right? And it's almost like it's one of those that what you incentivize is what starts to happen.
Yeah.
So I think we should be thinking about energy in a different way, like not about shutting it down. I mean, we also need to be thinking about, we actually have a whole bunch of aging infrastructure. It's the less exciting stuff to be thinking about. But to your point around, is anything not really a ventures play? Well, yeah, like the infrastructure side, and it's not just the build out of infrastructure needed. It's actually just looking after the stuff that's years old now, but decades old now. So governments and others need to, and infrastructure funders and other funding mechanisms. We can't afford to lose sight of that part, because the whole jigsaw puzzle only works
if fundamentally your infrastructure is in place and it's functioning. And it's interesting, like my mother-in-law's place in Italy is like built in the 1960s. We're trying to figure out whether she can install air conditioning there, and we're actually having to run through a whole bunch of hoops to figure it out. Why? Because essentially the wiring is decrepit, like it is old wiring. It would not pass, would not be up to code today, but it equally doesn't need to be changed because it's sort of like, well, once it's there, and we're not going to fiddle around with it. But again, like it's been a really interesting endeavor in trying to figure out how to get an AC put into an apartment, which you would assume should be really easy. It's not. I can definitely tell you. The other thing that really struck me just throughout the whole kind of topic there was everything you said, I would say, is what we need more generally in the UK. At policy level across all sectors, but especially around business. Yeah. Just make stuff easier.
Yeah.
Because actually, if you make stuff easier, then you will probably have more stuff built, which will probably mean...
Which will then solve the problems precisely. And I think that's exactly what kind of driving at there. It's why this word abundance is sort of floating around now, because I think it's a mindset shift. Like, if we've almost maybe been using language that's a bit degrowth in its nature, right? And we are seeing high energy prices and economic challenges that go with that, but you can turn all that around. You can, right? And we need to remember that. We need to really remember how good we are at innovating,
A return to those halcyon days. Well, let's talk about, you've used the word multiple times, right? Abundance. So what is your blueprint for energy abundance for the UK as we look towards, say, 2040, right? So not so distant, but, a bit out there.
So for me,
how would you like to see it evolve?
So for me, this is about having a North Star that is based on humanity thriving, right? So that should be what we're all striving for here at the end of the day, right? So to do that, you need plentiful, robust, reliable energy, 24/7, powering all these exciting things we're going to do. And if you come at that with a abundance mindset, that's what we're shooting for here, and that's what everyone's building in support of, and get everyone really motivated around that, we can really get after that, then I think we can achieve a lot. So that's really where we're coming from on that. Now, I think actually main pillars in our thesis are both energy and mobility, as we mentioned. So actually, as we've got, if we achieve that, and we've got these evolving ways of how we power ourselves getting around, we expect to see all kinds of interesting shifts around air, shipping, automotive, and even space. So I think all of that starts to become part of the same story. So I think it's going to get really exciting for humans in terms of how we can get ourselves around, how we get stuff around.
Space elevators in the future, do you think?
Yeah, and maybe we'll go to maybe some of the mining challenges will be solved because we'll be mining in space. Maybe maybe that's going to be part of the answer. Maybe that's where we'll go to get some of the stuff we need. You know, so I think there's so much to come. That there's a lot to be excited about, and it's trying to have really the real message behind that word is the positivity behind it. I felt that narratives around energy, maybe certainly in the UK, had got very negative, almost just, you know, we'd sort of, it was partly the weather, it's raining sometimes, whatever, we sort of talked ourselves into, it began to feel heavy.
That feels like that's been the kind of English everything for the last decade.
And Scottish for sure, because in Aberdeen, you know, can feel some of the same stuff.
So maybe it's British.
Northern Ireland, you know, this is the thing. Yeah, we're really good at.
We're good at talking ourselves down and out
over
of
a cup of tea. Like, well, yeah, completely right. But I think we can flip that, because actually it just takes a minute to say, okay, actually, it's actually good to know that there's problems worth getting after. You know.
Okay, so where I maybe challenge that or would want to dig into that is, it can't be abundance at all costs.
No.
Right? So I guess the degrowthers are like, stop now, stop everything.
Yeah.
You know, the world can't support more. We've got to stop doing stuff and not have kids and, you know, stop moving anywhere and not get on planes and all the rest of it, right? Yeah. Which is obviously just, okay, that is not a world that I particularly want to live in.
Exactly, yeah.
But equally, I don't want to live in a world where actually, you know, my daughter, who studied conservation, ecology, and biology, is definitely of the, you know, we can only support so much. You know, there's got to be a stop.
Yeah.
But again, I think, like, if we stop, then we don't look for solutions that would help us go beyond what is possible. I mean, like, if we say no, there's no point, then there's going to be no one out there looking at nuclear fusion or fission, or I can't remember which one it is now, but you know, both. Right. Okay.
Absolutely.
Fine.
Yeah.
But no one's going to be out there looking at that. No one's going to be looking, to your point.
Yeah.
You know, can we create you know, abundant energy in space somehow, right?
Well, this is the thing. Like, I mean, so I think the point you're making is really important, because, and this is why I always worry about words, because they become buzzwords, and then sometimes people use them in different ways, and then we start talking past each other. And I think that might be a risk here, because I think it happens with almost everything, right? But what we're trying to tap into with the thesis there is, it's not an exploitative abundance. It's not a sort of, you know, let's drain the resources or any of that kind of stuff. It's more a sort of efficient abundance, if you like, right? Because there is a lot of waste in the system. There's a lot we could be doing to make sure we're actually capturing the energy well, and distributing it to where it needs to be. And I think that, you know, some of the things that get talked about sometimes in a negative vein, like AI, or the data centers are so data hungry, etc., actually will present some of the solutions as well. All right, we'll get really smart about.
Well, they generate a lot of heat just as a start, right?
They do, but then you could
capture.
Yeah, exactly right. So this is the thing. So it's about waste minimization for sure. Like you mentioned, the recycling of batteries, and I really think that things like that get me excited, because there are startups that I'm looking at potentially for the portfolio. There's people doing stuff around battery swapping, for example, and I think it was interesting. Maybe that is actually part of the answer. If you move to this sort of fleets model, connected, ultimately autonomous, all the rest, and even the battery management could be automated. Like all of that could get really slick, you know. But then you've also got, you know, proper reuse, proper battery health monitoring, and ultimately end of life solutions where needed. Right? We can. It's in our gift to manage this stuff. So I think there's lots around. It's important to temper the word almost. It's not a way of saying we can just go wild. Like it's a way of saying, you know, there is a lot of innovation to come in terms of how we're going to harness energy, and then we can get really creative with some of that. I mean, longer term, some of the big venture play might be, you know, novel ways for how we capture the energy from the sun, right? So we've talked about solar. I think the solar of today is going to really radically change into the solar of tomorrow. I think we'll have new materials, nanomaterials, that will mean the rigid panel is no longer the only option. There'll be other options. Yeah, totally. And things that will last longer.
I mean, I still remember in the early 2009, there was that famous car, right? Which was just like really flat and dome-ish and was solar powered. And I was like, wow, this could be something. And of course that just then never happened. But like,
but it could still.
But it could.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah. And I also think because people often we worry about, quite understandably, we worry about intermittency, right? And if in the case of solar, of course, like, you know,
in the UK,
the sun's going to set. Well, but one, there's a whole thing about PV, and it's more about light anyway. But even then, right, you've only got certain hours in the day. You've still got a storage consideration. You've still got how effective is that right now? But I mean, some of the big plays, the moonshot things around like space-based solar, and you know, if you're actually capturing the sun's energy up there and bringing it back to Earth in some way, you know, we won't need to think so much about is it day or night in the bit of the world that you happen to be on.
You're just there. You're in front of the sun.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think this is the exciting thing from my perspective is exactly as you said, right? Like it is an evolution. And, you know, if you think about, you know, up until what 150, maybe 200 years ago, like energy was your candle, the fire, human power, animal power, and then we landed on steam, and then we found hydrocarbons, and that drove that first wave of immense industrialization and innovation, and travel and transport and everything else that came with it. And then we kind of stagnated, not in terms of what we've done, but in terms of kind of searching for those energy options. So we're almost in the first new wave of energy thinking.
Yeah, totally.
If I can put it that way, right? Like we've cottoned on to the fact that, hey, there are other solutions, and some of those solutions have only become apparent because of other incremental changes in technology over time. And to your point, you know, whether that's nanomaterials, whether that is, you know, smaller chips, whether that is the battery technology that is, you know, has been developed over time, etc. But that, you know, we could see step changes because there is just constantly new stuff being developed, whether that's in material labs, whether that's in terms of software, whether that's in terms of cabling or whatever. Like, I mean, I think I mentioned this to you. I mean, I remember talking to a family office who, and I think this may have even been pre-COVID, to be fair, but it was certainly 4 or 5 years ago at the very least. You know, they had invested in a business that had basically figured out cabling or material that would allow them to transport energy at a similar efficiency as you can currently transport data, right? Like, so fiber optics. And so the application of that is you set up a massive solar farm in the Sahara, for argument's sake, and then you can just pipe that energy everywhere, potentially, right? And I have no idea what happened with that business, whether it's still alive, whether it's still going. I think they managed to get to at least a mile with quite good efficiency. Whether they could get further than that, who knows? And that's probably that would have been the issue. But the point is, okay, if it didn't work then, that's not to say it might not work in 5 years or in 10 years, because the technology will improve. The idea has been had. Now it's about the execution on that idea. It's like everything else within, it's often the case that there is no wrong idea. There's just ideas that are too early, right? Like that. And I think that's where we are with energy in a lot of ways.
I think so. And I think, you know, that kind of does mean it is one of the most exciting, if not the most exciting field to be into right now, because the story is not yet written. And I think so many people are working the problem as well, that we're going to see some really exciting innovations on the horizon. So it's almost like it's people are getting hungry for the change, and in trying to bring that change forward, they're sort of saying, okay, so we'll stop all this other stuff. But it doesn't quite work like that. It's almost like you have to, we can't, as we said, like there's defense and other things to think about. So we cannot break the system. We have to let that be fostered, let that run properly, while creating the environment for, you know. Yeah,
it's like these things happen in parallel and in tandem.
Yeah.
And potentially even interlinked, right?
Yeah.
Like it's you know, what you know, it's like, think about a hybrid car, right? Like at the end of the day, that is both old as well as new energy technology working hand in hand, right? Essentially. And there is a potential to kind of do that across the whole system. So
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think, because of that, like, it often leads to how do we make decisions ultimately, or which technology should win, like you were saying, right? So governments might get involved, and sometimes they've not been historically they've not been the best at picking the best outcomes. So you kind of want markets to be doing that, but we also want, like, everyone's kind of invested in this, like, and you asked earlier about, like, learning to disagree agreeably almost, and I think this area has become so politicized because it's so fundamental for life that everyone feels it, and because it is Venn diagramming into all these other things. I think what needs to happen is almost take a step back and remember we're not actually on different sides, really. Like, it's in everyone's interests for us to get this right, and we won't get everything right. We will have to learn from some things, and we'll have to, like, change our mind about things on the basis of new information, and and sort of making the space for totally okay to profoundly disagree on some of the answers here, and, like, let's debate it and let's bring evidence to those conversations. If we could do that,
Nuance. Who'd have thought? I mean, like, in 2025, can anyone have a nuanced conversation anymore? I'm not entirely sure.
Well, exactly, but I think we need to strive for that. Like, because it's not, it's in this and it's in everything. Like, this, all the big topics now, right? Like, we've almost have to revisit, like, the beauty of debate, if you like. And it's okay to disagree, like,
I mean, this is one of the reasons for this podcast. It's to be able to have a long conversation about topics that, people maybe only have a very, very superficial view on.
Yeah.
And I think it is super important, because otherwise all we get is the sound bites. All we get is the politician saying net stupid zero or whatever, right? Like, and he may be right to an extent, but he's also probably wrong about a whole bunch of stuff within that as well. And all that then happens is people get entrenched into no, X good, Y bad. Therefore, again, to my earlier point, fossils bad, renewables good. And no, it's more nuanced than that. And there is an interplay.
More nuanced. And it's also okay to change your mind as well, like, on the basis of new information. I think sometimes people have
strong opinions held weakly.
Exactly. Yeah. It's really healthy, right? And I think we've kind of lost that a bit, because people think, oh, well, I've been saying this, I've been really banging the drum on this, I can't change my mind now. And actually you can, and we should actually really admire people who do,
and encourage it, because I think we'd be in a healthier place if we were. I want to round off with a couple of questions that that I asked all my guests. So the first is, and we somewhat touched a little bit on this when we were talking about your early, your career at BP and so on. But what is one thing that you have a contrarian conviction about from any area of life, whether that's work, politics, socially, or at home?
Yes. So it's actually following on from what you were just saying there, like, because you were saying one of the reasons you have this podcast is people can really spend a bit of time digging into the topic, right? Something that's occurred to me recently is, although this might sound slightly bizarre, I think podcasts have a massive role to play in solving these issues and saving the world to some extent, right?
Excellent.
No, I do, because I was thinking about it. I was thinking, why is it I'm thinking that? And I realized I've been hearing a lot of stuff. This is why I think it's maybe contrarian, if you like. So there's a sort of belief in society at the moment that we've all lost our attention span.
Yeah.
But actually, not really. People will engage with things like podcasts, and there's a whole bunch of them. Like, there's so many of them, and they will take the time to go through it. So that encourages me. That suggests to me there's a hunger for knowledge out there.
Yeah, people just don't want to read, but they
don't want to read, but we've got this fantastic way of delivering the content. Yeah. And it can be visually engaging, or if you've had a long day looking at the screen, you can lie with your eyes shut and still listen, right? And so so there's that. And I think you're right. There's maybe because of all the screen time and other things. Yes, reading is perhaps less of a go-to than it might have been otherwise. And because of that, newspapers and magazines and all, even if they're online, it's maybe less of where people get their.
I don't religiously every day read a paper, whether online or offline.
Yeah.
I will click on articles that are of interest to me, but I will read deeply either articles or newsletters or Substacks or stuff like that but especially books.
Yeah.
Right. And if I'm interested in a topic, then I will find a book.
Yeah.
And then hopefully find another book. And actually, and we talked about AI and abundance and so on. Apart from the slop that's coming out from Meta and so on, like all these use cases which just keep adding more noise into the system. Yeah. What I found really useful is I can use AI as a sparring partner around the stuff that I'm reading, right? So I can get it to explain a topic in a bit more depth if it's something that's been glanced over and I don't know. Or I can say, well, hold on a second, it's saying this, but this is my understanding. What am I missing? Or something else, right? So the ability to actually get deeper into stuff. And I think the problem is, people using AI as a replacement rather than an augmentation of their thinking. That's where we're in trouble. I saw this Instagram post, which, ironically sitting there scrolling through 7-second kind of thing. There was this Instagram post or a post somewhere, I can't remember, where it was, the world, if everyone used AI for everything, the chat GPT for everything. And it was sort of like a guy walking into a corner shop and, the guy behind the counter saying hello. And the guy saying, literally typing into his phone, the owner said hello to me, how should I respond? And then ChatGPT giving the response and this interaction happening. I was like, geez, I mean, I feel like we could be in that age.
Yeah.
But I agree. I mean, I think, things like podcasts.
Hopefully it gets people
enhance.
thinking, because it does help, right? I think there's a whole world here, right? We need to think about education system and like, are we teaching critical thinking?
Yeah, sure.
These are big things, but we do need to be doing that. Yeah. But yeah, I am encouraged just by the amount of engagement there is with podcasts that are going into deep, meaty topics, like, and really, especially if that helps to encourage, okay, actually there's a different perspective, or maybe I'm going to go away and think about that. So that, I think they're maybe not fully talked about enough, just how valuable they are.
I've had my mind change on this podcast
Yeah.
several times. I mean, I wouldn't say all the time, but certainly several times. Like, or it's challenged my thinking, or it's stretched my thinking, or it's it's drawn further thinking, right? Like about a topic. But one of the reasons for that is because I get to talk to like experts on a regular basis, which is which I'm incredibly both grateful for, but also privileged to be able to do. So one final question, so we can get to know the real you, although I feel like we've probably gone a long way to getting to know the real you already. What is something that moves you emotionally?
Emotionally, so many things. I'm quite a sensitive soul, actually. But so I mentioned the like Keith for Kids books and things. So my little nephews and niece, like and also being able to delight kids, bringing them a story and so on. That type of thing. I've got 2 younger sisters, and there's something about that number 3. So the way we describe it is, as the oldest sister, like I set the rules, and then my younger sister, Janie, she's the reason that the rules exist. She's also a doctor now, but she's the reason that the rules exist. Yeah. And then the younger one, like, the rules don't apply to her. And that little thing of 3 that could apply to the nephews and niece as well, and so on and so forth. But so I guess family, close friends. I've got some friends who mean the absolute world to me, and one of the things I found with going all in on founding VC and everything is, like with anything, it's if you're building it, it's all consuming. I'm sure the feeling. So there's trade-offs, and I feel like, I'm neglecting these friends who mean the world to me I haven't seen. That tugs on me. I get emotional about that. So people,
I find the friends that matter doesn't really matter. You can pick up the phone at any time, and it'll be like you picked up the conversation from
last week, and the years just melt away.
Exactly,
it's magical when that happens.
It's absolutely wonderful. Angela, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. For the audience, where can they find you online? Are you on LinkedIn? Are you on Twitter? Where's the best place to find you on the internet?
So I am on LinkedIn, and I'm on X, but I haven't.
X.
I know I'm trying to get used to that as well. But I haven't updated my profile there, so I am going to do that. That's on my to-do list. So you will find me on both.
Amazing. Well, look, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been absolutely incredible and an absolute pleasure.
So I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.